Hi, everyone. My name is Kyle Benson. I am a couples and sex therapist who also is a researcher in Dr. John Gottman's Love Lab, where I help kind of understand the science of relationships. And what we're going to be talking about today is some of the research that Dr. John Gottman and his research team used to predict the success of relationships. And I'm collaborating with the Minds Journal today to really learn or really talk about kind of the importance of the four horsemen that Dr. John Gottman and his research team discovered, and how they can impact your relationship and what you need to do to make it different. So as I'm going to talk about this, feel free to ask some questions in the chat, and I will do my best to respond to those. And so where I'd like to start is really talk about kind of where this came from. And so the four horsemen, what John and Julie Gottman call the four horsemen of the apocalypse, is they are four specific behaviors that couples can get into that actually really cause damage to the relationship. And so how this was discovered is John and his research team over 40 years ago were trying to figure out what makes a relationship work. Why do some couples have happy marriages? Why do some couples kind of have really unhappy marriages or end up separating? What goes on here? And so what John decided to do was, well, let's just have couples come in and talk, and let's just watch them. Let's see what they do. And so he had straight heterosexual couples, gay and lesbian couples come in and have conversations just about anything for about 15 minutes, and then a specific conflict conversation in their relationship. And what he ended up finding out is that as those couples came in, and they'd come in in year one, they'd come in a few years later, even up to 12 years later, he ended up finding kind of patterns that emerged in determining what caused some relationships to become really strong and other relationships to really struggle. And one of the key things that he discovered in those patterns was called the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And those behaviors, which we're going to talk about today, he can actually use to predict with a 90% accuracy whether a relationship will fail. And even so down to the timeline where after 5.5 years of being married, if these behaviors become a habitual way of communicating with one another, it's very likely that the couple will end up separating. So that's what we're really going to be talking about and why this is so important to your relationship. And we're going to dive into these four different behaviors, what they are, what to do differently, because these four behaviors and communication styles actually block us from having the type of relationship that we want and having our partners really hear what we need, having them feel seen, having you feel seen. And so by being able to talk in a different way and not engage in these behaviors, it can really help your relationship. You feel more loved, your partner feel more loved, and get you two to have a lot more of a stronger relationship, which is ultimately what the goal of John and Julie Gottman is to do, is take this research and apply it in a way to help improve your relationship. And so the first behavior that we'll be really talking about is what is called criticism. So criticism is that first four horsemen, and that is really a character attack. And so if I walk in the door from work, or my partner walks in the door from work, and the house is a mess, I kind of have two choices in that, in responding possibly. And so one of the first choice could be that critical choice, which is I could look at my partner and say, you're so lazy, you've been home all day and you haven't done anything, right? I go after her character and I attack who she is. She's then going to want to defend herself and really kind of explain why she hasn't gotten those things, or the other things that she had to deal with the kids or other things, which then ends up missing my need. And it actually sabotages me from being really heard about what's going on for me. And so the antidote to doing this better in your relationship is what we call a soft startup. And so a soft startup includes I feel about what specifically you're noticing and what you need. And so in that first thing that I said, it was a very harsh startup. It was I'm poking you, you're lazy, you had all day. My partner's just going to hear an attack, right? And what John's research also found is that 96% of the time, if a conversation starts harshly within the first 3 minutes, it's going to end harshly 96% of the time. So again, how we bring up our issues is really important to building our relationship or actually pulling us farther apart. And so the antidote to criticism is that soft startup. And that's, again, that I feel overwhelmed about coming into the house and seeing all the dishes or the laundry sitting on the couch. I really need us to team up and knock this out today. Or can you at least do the dishes right now? Because it really overwhelms me to see this in the house. The difference is it focuses on what is going on for me and what I'm needing. And what I found when I work with couples and partners are able to do that softer startup versus that harsh startup, instead of pulling away and getting distant from that harsh startup, often partners start to move closer because they're hearing that you're struggling, you're having a hard time, and they want to help you because they love you. And so that's kind of why this is really important. And actually, it's talking in this way while more vulnerable actually allows your partner hear what you're needing, what's going on for you, and often has them move closer to you. The two key things in this soft startup that is really important to remember is you need to actually name a feeling. That sometimes with the couples I work with, they say, I feel that you never do the dishes, right? That's just a backhanded criticism, right? Especially the part of you never, because that's often, while sometimes that might be true, often that's not true. And so it really has to be a feeling. I'm feeling overwhelmed, or I'm feeling exhausted. I'm feeling frustrated. I'm feeling scared. And that focus really helps your partner understand the feeling, right? And it also actually changes how you really express yourself. The other thing that I find that couples get stuck in learning how to apply that soft startup is they will say what they don't need versus what they do need. And so that could be an example of, I don't want you to watch TV at night, right? That doesn't really give your partner a recipe in that soft startup, it doesn't give your partner a recipe to be close to you. So I feel that you watch too much TV. I don't need you to, I don't want you to watch TV at night. That's a very vague thing. Your partner's just hearing what you don't want. What really helps them move closer and actually builds your relationship is focusing on, again, your feeling and what you do want. I feel really kind of sad that we don't get time to connect. Is there a way that we could shut off that TV and sit down and talk a little bit or cuddle a little bit, right? Very different. It gives your partner a recipe of what's going on internally and what they can do with you to make the relationship feel more close and connected. So that's kind of that first 4 horsemen and what you can do differently, right? Criticism. The second 4 horsemen is called contempt. And this is a really important one because it is the most destructive to a relationship. Because contempt is acting in a superior way to our partner. It's as if we're talking down to them. And so John calls this the sulfuric acid of love because it really just impacts our relationship and even actually makes us more likely to get physically ill or capture or get a virus or something like that because it is so damaging to our immune systems to be talked to in this way. And so how that can show up as sarcasm, that can show up as name calling, that can show up as eye rolling, that can show up as sneering, mocking our partner, or even what we call hostile humor. And essentially it's really kind of talking down to our partner or acting in ways that say kind of, you're ridiculous, you don't know what you're talking about, you're inferior to me. And so an example of that is, partner might come home from work and they just want to kind of sit on the couch, they're exhausted and have a break. And the other partner comes in and just says, oh, you think you get to take a break? Like, I've been working all day with the kids. I've been doing all this stuff. and all you do is you just act like another kid who sits down on the couch and wants to play video games, right? They're essentially treating their partner like a kid. And that is, again, I'm talking down to you. I'm now the adult, you're another kid. And that's going to really damage, again, you from being heard. And it's going to cause your partner to want to shut down or want to defend themselves. And so, what I really want you to understand is that that way of communicating our needs blocks us from being really understood and connected with. And so the antidote to this is really creating a culture in the relationship of respect and appreciation. And this is something I find that a lot of couples, particularly when criticism and contempt start to show up in the relationship, they actually stop doing. And so what we want to focus on is we want to start to create a culture of cherishing one another, noticing what our partner is doing right, sharing what we appreciate, talking about what we love about them, and even having them share that with us as well. And that sense of connectedness, that sense of cherishing one another and appreciating one another actually starts to remove that contempt from the relationship, because we start to see our partner in a positive light, and actually starts to then get us to become a little bit softer with that softer startup to start to share what we're actually needing in the relationship. So that's kind of the second behavior that is really important to change, because it really just destroys relationships so quickly. And you just have to be really mindful in yourself of how that might show up, and try to really, again, use that softer startup if there's a issue that's present, and foster that culture of appreciating one another, respecting one another, and treating each other as equals in the relationship. The third behavior is defensiveness. So often this can show up in response to criticism, in response to contempt. Sometimes it can show up in response to a soft startup, but most often it shows up in response to criticism or contempt. And essentially it's our partners here in attack, and they're kind of putting up a shield and protecting themselves from feeling hurt. And what happens though is they kind of take this stance of, it's not my fault this is going on, it's your fault. And so it's kind of a counterattack, right? And so like even around, let's go back to, right, being the partner says you're lazy, you haven't done anything all day. That partner could be defensive and say, well, it's not my fault. The kids have been so busy. I'm just exhausted. I can't control that. Right. And so I don't have any responsibility. I have no role in this. And it's kind of a pushback. That's the innocent victim part of it. A counterattack, which I said I was going to talk about, but I'll talk about now, is really like, I'm not lazy. You're the lazy one. You didn't do this. You didn't do that. You didn't take care of the trash before you left for work. You didn't do these other things. And so instead of it being, you're attacking me for being this way, I'm going to attack you back for the things that you're not doing. And what happens is defensiveness doesn't actually protect the relationship. While it might feel like it protects us, it actually destroys the relationship, because the main issue doesn't really get addressed. And so what the antidote to that is if your partner is communicating to you or you're starting to feel defensive in any way, the antidote is to take some responsibility take some responsibility in the issue, even if it's small, right? Yeah, I have been really exhausted, and I really wish I would have gotten to that. I'll work on getting to that later today, right? Or getting to the dishes or helping out with the kids or something like that, right? Taking even just a sliver of responsibility actually helps our partner feel heard. It actually will help them kind of soften a little bit. It'll make it a little bit easier for you two to come up with solutions on what to do differently. And so that's why taking some responsibility will really help the relationship and your partner feel heard and move you two forward, rather than kind of backwards, where we're just getting stuck in an escalated conversation. Just looking at comments, making sure I'm not missing anything. Okay, we're good. The fourth behavior is stonewalling. And so this is sometimes I find couples or people really struggle with understanding this behavior, stonewalling versus kind of silent treatment. And so I want to talk about the difference between the two of those. So stonewalling, what we kind of discovered from John Gottman's observational research is that stonewalling happens when a partner or the person listening to the conversation emotionally withdraws from the conversation. And what happens on the inside, because from John Gottman's research, he had kind of a bunch of physiological stuff where we could see heart rate, we could see how they were moving in their bodies, is their heart rate actually skyrockets to over 120 beats per minute. And so while on the outside they're shutting down, on the inside they're really overwhelmed. And in trying to understand this with the research participants, John discovered that partners, when they are emotionally flooded, are often thinking, okay, should I say this? Nope, don't say that. That's just going to make things worse, right? And so they're just feeling really overwhelmed, and so they feel really stuck. And so it's kind of a protective, I'm shutting down. I'm not going to say anything that's going to help us here. This is already overwhelming, and it's not going to go well no matter what I say. And so that's what we classify as a stonewalling behavior. That is different than kind of silent treatment. Silent treatment is that behavior where we're choosing not to engage our partner in a conversation. So really it's the intent. The stonewalling is, I need to kind of protect myself. I'm overwhelmed. I'm shutting down. It's just kind of a response our body has. Whereas the silent treatment occurs when we might walk by our partner and they might say something and we just kind of flat out ignore them. Or we go 3 days without talking to them. Essentially, the intent behind the silent treatment is really punishment. And that that is also destructive to relationship. But between the stonewalling and the silent treatment, I really want you to understand that difference. So going back to stonewalling, when you're in conflict with your partner, and you do feel like you're shutting down, you do feel overwhelmed, or if you see your partner shutting down, you need to stop the conversation right then, right there. Because what's happening when we become emotionally flooded in that way, where our heart beats over 120 beats per minute, we actually lose the part of our brain that can problem solve, that can see your partner's perspective, that can hear actually what's going on. And so what we need to do is we need to take at least a 20 to 30 minute break from one another, doing something that's going to help soothe us. And what John's research found is when they ask couples to take that 20-minute break and read a magazine or look at, read a book or watch some random TV show and then come back and have the conversation 20, 30 minutes later, it was if they had a brain transplant. All of a sudden they were able to communicate in a much different way because their nervous system, their body wasn't overwhelmed. Their body wasn't in this kind of protective, I got to shut down because this is not going well. Instead, they're more relaxed and they're able to engage in the conversation more openly. And so that's another thing, is the antidote to stonewalling is to take a timeout and come back and resume the conversation 20, 30 minutes later, using, again, the soft startup, taking responsibility, and really kind of showing, again, the appreciation for one another. So these are, in short, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And one of the things that's really important to understand is these happen even in healthy relationships, and can really show up in any relationship. The difference, though, is that in healthy relationships, this might happen only once, and then it'll be repaired. Whereas in unhealthy relationships, what happens is it becomes a habitual way of communicating. And so partners become more critical, they become more defensive, they become more contemptuous. Stonewalling happens more and more, and it just pulls the relationship farther and farther apart. And so that's where we get really stuck. And that's why we're really talking about this today. So I'm going to look at some of the questions and answer some of those. So there's a question from Natasha on, was I on a project on the island of Nevis? That was not me. Another question from Dolly. When is the right time to keep silence? Um, I think the right time to keep silence or keep quiet is kind of maybe how I would put it, is really if we're feeling, again, emotionally flooded, where we're wanting to stonewall, we need to take that 30-minute break, or when our partner's really talking. And so one of the things that some of the tools that John and Julie Gottman created in understanding the research and following couples for many years and doing research for over 40 years is that they use this kind of speaker listener model called the Gottman Rap Report. And so what happens is, and this is what I would do with my couples in session, is one partner is going to really kind of use that softer startup, right? I feel really sad about us not being able to connect. I really want us to go on a date, right? And so they really start to share as a speaker what's going on for them and really from their experience. Then the other partner is going to be kind of silent and really listening. And what I have found even with my couples really helpful, is that listener focuses on just understanding their partner's perspective and what's going on for them. And so what I found really helpful is having the listener actually summarize, okay, what I hear you saying is you're really sad that we haven't really connected and you want to go on a date. Am I getting that right? Yes. Okay. Now we can start to talk about what to do with that. And so from there, after that understanding is confirmed, then partners can they can actually switch roles, and the other partner can talk about what's been going on for their relationship around that same topic. Yeah, I too have been sad, and it just has felt so busy that we haven't even made time for each other. The other partner, who was the speaker, who's now the listener, can summarize that, and that understanding of one another, being able to really see each other before we start to problem solve, can actually really bring us a lot closer and start to build a bridge from where we're struggling. So that's a really important tool that I talk about on my website on kylebenson.net. You can also find more about that on gottman.com. So I'm going to answer a few other questions. Walking out on a tour partner is considered stonewalling also. Yeah. So there's the question. Yeah, and it is really important to have a partner who, when they do notice they're feeling overwhelmed or they need a break, for them to actually talk about that. That's the other really important thing. When we're going to take that time out, if we're overwhelmed, it is not healthy to walk out of the room and just leave. That actually really does not help. It leaves our partner feeling kind of left and like the conversation doesn't matter, and it causes a lot of issues. And so when we do that timeout, and I'm just particularly when I'm working with my couples, we have some type of signal, whether it's a timeout. It could be, I'm feeling really flooded right now. I need a break. Can we come back in 30 minutes, or can we check in 30 minutes and then resume this later? And that timeout, having that even talked about and clearly defined before stonewalling comes up, before that emotional flooding comes up, actually really helps it. So the partner who is not flooded still wants to talk about this can go, okay, yep, I see that you're not in a place to really engage in the conversation right now because of what's going on inside your body. You're feeling overwhelmed. So I am not going to engage in this conversation anymore. I'm going to allow you to take that 30-minute break. I'm going to take a 30-minute break. And then I know that we'll come back to one another and talk about it. If we don't come back to one another, or the partner who is taking that break kind of continues to take time, doesn't ever bring the issue back up, we don't ever bring the issue back up, that timeout won't be something that will be trusted. And so anytime it's asked for in the future, it's not going to be successful. It's going to cause more conflict. So when an issue comes up, if we are going to take that timeout, it is very important to come back and have a conversation about it, even if it's hard, to try to work through it. And that's why using that soft startup, using kind of non-defensive listening, as we've been talking about today, will actually start to build the bridge to communicating about this a little bit differently. So I hope that kind of helps answer that question. Another question that I'm seeing from Anne is, how do you address negative communication, blaming, name calling? Again, if that's coming up, right? If that's being given to you, you can use a soft startup in response to that of, I'm feeling hurt when I hear kind of how you're talking to me about this. And it really blocks me from understanding what you're needing. I really need to know what you're needing, what you're longing for, what you're wishing for. Can you please help me do that? And so that, again, using that soft startup to help our partner see and understand what's happening can actually help them help them understand that how they're talking about this stuff actually blocks them from getting their needs met. Because that's what the research shows, is when we are using blaming, when we are using name calling, it blocks us from getting our relationship to feel closer and are getting our needs met. So that's one way you can do with it. The other thing that you can do is you can talk to your partner and say, hey, we keep getting stuck and not being able to really talk about stuff in a way that brings us closer. And that really makes me sad. Can we maybe learn ways to communicate together? Again, taking responsibility, I have some roles in that too. And I want to grow with you on that. That's another really soft way to kind of say, hey, I don't like that we're getting stuck. I want us to grow. I want us to get closer. And that often becomes more of an invitation for a partner to also want to work with us too. So I hope that helps answer that question. And then from Dolly, when is enough enough? That's kind of again, going back to John's research, really, if the relationship is really stuck in these kind of 4 behaviors, these 4 horsemen, and partners are unwilling to work on communicating differently, they feel guarded from one another and really kind of pulled apart. And they literally have no respect for one another, even if they think about how they met each other, or even positive memories, and those have been transformed into negative, what we call kind of a negative perspective. That can sometimes be a time when the relationship really needs to be evaluated. And so I actually have a quiz on the Gottman Institute on Gottman.com to kind of help couples kind of look at whether to stay in a relationship or whatnot. What I found in the couples I work with, even when these 4 behaviors have become a habitual way of communicating, what I have found is really our partners really willing to work and do the hard work to start to communicate in a much softer way, to start to communicate in a more vulnerable way that can actually start to build the relationship and bring us closer. And so that is what I have found to be most helpful. And so really it's, are you willing to work on it? If partners are not willing to work on it, and even if you've tried to do some of this stuff and it just causes so much conflict, you're stuck in the 4 horsemen, you don't want to do therapy, there's a refusal to do that, then you kind of got to decide if this is a relationship I want to stick with. If your partner is willing to work on it, again, there's books from Gottman, there's an Art and Science of Love, there's even now what we call Gottman Relationship Coach, or even couples therapists such as myself or others across kind of the world that you could see that could support you in changing some of these behaviors. But if there's not a willingness to work on changing these things, which is hard, then you kind of decide if the relationship is worth sticking it out. So that's kind of my answer to that question. It really depends. I often recommend getting professional help, but also you got to make a decision of it's your relationship. So that's kind of how I'll answer that. Going to Kurt's question of how to feel less contempt in relationship. So 2 things around that. The first thing is really starting to create that culture of appreciating and cherishing one another, right? Focusing on what your partner does right and verbally saying that, and starting to notice that. With my couples, sometimes I'll actually have them do what I call a cherishing journal, where each day they will write out something they see their partner doing right and something they really cherish. And it's very specific. And so it's like, hey, in the journal, it's like, thank you so much for, giving me a big hug today. I'm so glad that or I feel so loved by you. You're such an amazing partner. And so while it might seem simple, those little things start to build this kind of connection and move us away from the contempt of I'm better than you to kind of we're closer, I can be softer with you. And so that's kind of the first part is we got to focus on how are we communicating, how are we being affectionate towards one another, how are we caring for one another, to start to change that. Then the second thing is when we are feeling contemptuous, there's often a hidden longing underneath that hurt, right? Underneath that communication pattern. And so really it's you're wanting to understand or try to slow down and connect with um what's underneath that contempt, right? So if it's that contempt of you're always a child, all you do is play video games, likely underneath that is a sense of feeling really lonely and needing to connect, needing to feel like you matter to your partner. And so can you bring it up in that software startup, right? I feel lonely that we haven't connected in a while. And I really want to put the video games away and just have us connect. Can we do that tonight? Or can we do that, make that a priority more often in the relationship? So that's a really big thing is, again, the creating the culture and then working on communicating our needs in a way that our partner can hear and move towards. So any other questions about the 4 horsemen? I know I'm talking a lot about these. Okay. So again, these 4 behaviors, criticism, contempt, defensiveness, stonewalling, they are really damaging to relationship, especially when it becomes a habitual way of communicating with one another. It pulls us farther apart. Again, Gottman was able to, with a 90% accuracy, predict that if this became a habitual way of communicating, the relationship would end. And even after 5 years of being married, if that becomes a habitual way of communicating, it just destroys the relationship. And so while on paper, this stuff seems pretty easy, right? Do a soft startup, do that recipe I feel about, and here's what I need. Not being defensive, and instead of being defensive, taking responsibility, instead of being contemptuous, creating a culture of appreciating and cherishing one another and sharing that verbally and expressing that, and then also stonewalling, instead of kind of shutting down, noticing that you're feeling overwhelmed, ask for that timeout and take that 30-minute break, and then again return to the conversation so we can actually deal with the issue. The reason why it's important to change these behaviors is what we know from relationships and the research on relationships is that conflict actually has a really important purpose in a relationship. If it's done well and we're able to communicate in a way that really helps our partner understand us and for us to understand them, conflict can actually be used as material to construct a stronger relationship. Because in the conflict and the tension of the issue, we actually get to learn about ourselves, we get to learn about our partner more, and it actually can cultivate intimacy within the relationship. And so that's why it's really important to learn how to do conflict differently. One of the other things that we know from the research as well, from John and Julie Gottman's research, is only 31% of relationship problems are solvable, which means a lot of the issues that are going to show up in your relationship are not going to be solvable. In fact, 69%. And so the difference between those two solvable ones, that might be like, okay, we need to divvy up the chores a little bit more. That's pretty easy to work on when we're able to communicate softly. We're able to feel like a team against kind of how we divvy up chores and work together. And so that can be really something easy to solve versus the unsolvable stuff are often kind of perpetual differences between partners. And so that could mean one partner is a saver, one partner is a spender. And so they often kind of butt heads about this issue. That probably will never change. And when I'm working with couples who get stuck like this, they're often stuck because when that issue comes up, they are using the 4 horsemen to communicate what's going on. They criticize one another. You just want to save. You never want to have fun. You just want to spend. You have no thoughts for our future. And so they just attack each other, and it really blocks them from having a close relationship. And so what we found is, whether it's talking about money, whether it's talking about other things, when there is that 69% that we're not moving forward, there's often a hidden dream that's really significant that hasn't been talked about. And so it's really important to slow down and really ask our partners, like, why is this so important to you? What's so significant about this? And there's a lovely guided conversation from the Gottman Institute called the Dreams Within Conflict that can often help partners kind of slow down and really deeply understand why we've been so stuck in this conflict. And when partners are able to soften and not use the four horsemen, but really express why it's so important to them, and the other partner is able to do the same, again, it starts to build a bridge between these differences, and we start to find a middle ground or compromise, even temporary, that can make our relationship work. And as John says, you don't have to solve all your issues for your relationship to thrive. And that's why learning how to talk, being able to have healthy communication can really build our relationship, can use the issues of our conflicts to construct a stronger relationship, and bring us closer and bring us to understand each other better. So that's really kind of why this is so important, why I teamed up with the Mind Journal to really talk about this. Any other questions for today about the four horsemen, about relationships that I could answer? Okay. So as we kind of wrap up today, I just want to share a little bit more about the Gottman method, as well as kind of where you could find more information about some of the work I do. So if you want to learn even more about the four horsemen or some of the patterns that causes relationships to fall apart and what you can do differently to strengthen your relationship, I would recommend going to Gottman.com. They have a lot of resources. I have like 50 different blog posts on there. And so that is something that's available to you as well. I also have my own blog, KyleBenson.net, which talks a lot about relationships. There's over 170 articles there talking about conflict, talking about sex, talking about emotional intimacy, talking about being connected, and can be really helpful to building a relationship. I also have a course called the 7-Day Emotional Connection Challenge, which is a little adventure that you and your partner can take to kickstart your emotional connection again, and build the relationship. So I hope this was helpful. Again, thank you, Mind Journal, for allowing me to come on and talk about this. And thank you for listening. All right.